Hyvää iltapäivää kaikille. Mä oon Juha Ropponen ROECS:stä ja tänään meillä olisi tarkoitus pitää webinaari Blanccon datan tuhoamisesta, suojaamisesta ja oikein paljon tervetuloa kaikille ja mikäli sitten tulee kysymyksiä tässä kesken kaiken, niin laittakaa kysymyksiä tulemaan ja otetaan ne sitten lopuksi tonne. Ja meillä on täällä Fredrik Forslundi Blancon puolelta pitämässä esitystä ja toivotaan Fredrik tervetulleeksi ja muuta kuin pidetään tällaiset. Toivottavasti on antoisa sessio. Fredrik, go ahead. You are the host. Welcome.
Ska jag fortsätta på svenska or English?
In English, please.
That is a promise. I will continue in English. Kiitos for the introduction, and we look forward to having a good session. I have been told that the Finnish weather is beautiful today, so we will try to keep our messaging short and efficient, and make sure that all of you that are on the call have plenty of opportunity to ask your questions or discuss opportunities that you see. The whole idea behind this is to make sure that we have a good knowledge exchange to identify new sales opportunities and where we can find additional business. So in the invitation, we promised to talk a little bit about cloud and how that is driving opportunities. We will also make sure that we understand different erasure standards and security levels. There's a popular framework called the NIST at the moment, and that's good for all of us to understand. And then also where we see technical and process opportunities is when we look at remote deployment. So I will make sure to explain that in more detail. And then we also see use cases around virtual machines and managing that life cycle, which is quite an interesting topic. Around this, there's an opportunity to ask any kind of question or ask specific additional use cases. So feel free to raise your hand and or enter into the chat any kind of comment that you might have. So with that said, let's dive into some information together. So first of all, let me conclude one thing together with you. Why is this important right now when the sun is shining and we are in 2020 and currently there's an interesting pandemic going on? Well, before the pandemic started, Gartner had already released updated statements on how they view today's topic, i.e. data sanitization. And when you read their latest report targeting large organizations around the globe, they are concluding that robust data sanitization is a core C-level requirement for all IT organizations. And what is this telling us? It's telling us that there's a great opportunity at the moment to benefit from this and find ways to offer the end customer additional security, increased improved processes, and also making sure that we are protecting that data and saving costs. So listening to Gartner, we understand that this is a timely topic, but also, as we will come back to, the current work situation is also highlighting the need for data sanitization in specific situations. And we shall try to incorporate that in today's messaging. So why is Gartner coming to the conclusion that data sanitization is important? Well, let me summarize the last 20 years of development. Blancco has been in this business for over 20 years. But what we have seen lately is a very strong increase in privacy legislation, local legislation, different industry requirements, guidelines, ISO certifications that are aiming to protect data in the best possible way. And that brings certain requirements that needs to be implemented into organizations. So if we look at ISO 27001 as just an example, we can see that one of the security aspects that you need to live up to is to make sure that no assets leave the physical security of the organization with any data on there. And that's what we want to achieve. So a short summary for all of us when it comes to what is data sanitization. Well, it is the process to make sure that we are removing all data from the storage medium for good, so it never comes back to haunt you. And I think we are all aware of different ways of doing that. It is a common practice to destroy drives, for example. And let me see, the platform is pausing my screen sharing for some reason. Let me know if you can see it.
Okay, now we can see your presentation, but not in a present mode.
Let me see why it's not cooperating. There we go. Am I back?
Yes,
Do we
you
have the
are.
right screen up? Fantastic. I'm not sure why that happened. Let's see if it happens again. But what we need to take away from this slide is that physical destruction is something that we should always try to avoid. Why? Physical destruction, it is not environmentally friendly or drives sustainability. It's very challenging to get good audit trail. It's challenging to get efficiency, and you are definitely destroying any kind of value in drives and equipment when they are being destroyed. So instead, we want to work with software-based data sanitization. And with the Blancco software, we can trigger both cryptographic erasure and data erasure. And when we talk about, it keeps doing the same thing, platform. I will change and instead share my screen instead of sharing the application. See if that is more stable. You can see my screen again?
Yes, we can.
Very good. So let's see if this works better. So when we look at deploying software-based data sanitization, we're talking about data erasure. And if you compare that to physical destruction, of course, you can reuse the equipment. And the process when you run the software will always include verification and creating an erasure certificate. And for most customers, that is equally important as protecting the data, is being able to prove and show that you have actively erased the data and having that audit trail and the erasure certificate. And then, of course, anything that you can do to support environment and sustainability are today very popular options. So getting the audit trail, supporting sustainability, and making sure that we also preserve the value of the equipment. Those are the basic value components when we talk about data sanitization using software and data erasure. So very quickly, when we look at the last 20 years in the Blancco software portfolio, we have created a portfolio based on demand from the industry, where you today not only can target desktops and laptops where things began, but today you have a complete software portfolio where you can also target anything on the mobile side, SD cards, USB sticks, smartphones, tablets, but also in the data center. And that's our focus today. So today you can target individual file structures in storage systems or file servers. You can target individual virtual machines at end of life. You can target logical units, LUNs. You can use that to erase storage systems. You can very efficiently work with server decommissioning. And around these use cases, we want to make sure that we have some more tangible information after this webinar. A key takeaway that's important to be aware of is that, of course, the traditional data erasure technology stems from erasing magnetic drives. And it's a huge difference between a formatting process and running a software erasure process with a full security implementation. So it's very well known that you can run software-based erasure of magnetic drives. But there's still doubt in the market around SSDs. And everyone on the webinar today should bring with you the insight that today SSD erasure is a mature component of the data erasure industry. There's millions of SSD drives being erased every year, and you can get the exact same security as on traditional magnetic drives. If you go back 5-10 years in time, this was still a gray area where you could do some SSDs, but not all SSDs, and depending on the manufacturer, there could be security issues. But today, this is a mature storage technology with mature protocols, and where you can run a very secure erasure process to the same high level of security according to the NIST standard as you have for magnetic drives. So you can achieve NIST purge, which is what most organizations request. And you can do that for both SSD and magnetic storage. So that's important to bring with you. And let's move into the cloud. No one of us is flying at the moment, so moving to the clouds has to be done elsewhere. And the current pandemic has increased even further the growth rates of cloud adoption. And we see both public cloud as well as private cloud. And thinking about cloud, we need to think about the data migration movement, i.e., whenever we are moving data from on-prem to cloud, that will trigger the need for data sanitization of the original equipment. Sometimes that equipment stays on site and is being redeployed for new use cases, but very often that equipment is being decommissioned and sent off, and hopefully finding new environments where it can continue providing value. But it has to be sanitized beforehand. And also this migration to the cloud will often take individual data at individual times. For example, it can be the migration of a LAN or virtual machines from on-prem into cloud. And that means you surgically need to go in and erase that data after the migration has been completed. This is something that we see a great increase in demand around currently. And what can we do when we actually have data in the cloud? Well, we all know that AWS, Microsoft, and Google are the three giants batting it out around winning the public cloud market. There's a number of more suppliers as well, but if we just take the biggest one, AWS, and look at their infrastructure today, it's enormous. They have a multitude of different servings offerings, and they are adding billions and billions of business every year into their infrastructure. But how do we need to think around data once we move into AWS and the cloud, for example? Well, a common platform is the EC2 platform, where you are managing virtual machines and different storage components, for example. And what we're doing is that we're basically continuing with the same management as we have been doing before. We have servers and we have storage. The servers will have compute, and you can set whatever configuration you want, basically. But if you would have a project, for example, where you upload restricted data, data under compliance, data where you need an audit trail to show that you have taken every precaution possible to make sure that data has an auditable end of life. We see a lot of examples right now of customers that have migrated to the cloud, they're happily using the cloud, but then they want to be able to use very sensitive and restricted data in the cloud, and they want to be able to show an audit trail that we have actively erased it from the cloud infrastructure. And what can be done in that sense is that you actually install the Blancco LAN eraser client on a virtual machine, and then you map up the storage, and then without going into too much technical detail, you simply run the normal erasure process using a few selected commands. And at the end, you will have that audit trail that even though you're using an AWS public cloud infrastructure, you as the data controller have taken the precautions of removing that data in a secure way from the interface that exists to that data. And as we can see in this report example, this is from a customer case. They get the serial from the storage volume, the virtual storage volume that was used. and that is appreciated in many different contexts. So even when you have uploaded data into the cloud, you have the ability to target it for active erasure. So think about the migration process to the cloud, targeting data, but also having the opportunity to erase data actively once you're in the cloud. So moving on to where we sit today. I think all of us on this call are sitting in our home offices. There has been lockdowns around the world. Anyone that can work from home has been working from home. And that means that we have seen a number of different scenarios evolve for both end customers and partners. There has been restricted access for service providers and external vendors to come on site to do the different tasks that they normally do around decommissioning, for example. There might have been quick changes in staffing and assets that needs to be processed. There's a lot of corporate assets and corporate data sitting in home offices. How do we protect that? Test system, backup location, disaster recovery sites might have been in use. How do we target data erasure once we have done a DR exercise, for example? Temporary assets, loaners, how do we create good processes to make sure that all of those can be efficiently used without risking data breaches? And the key thing here that we have seen the demand for, and a very rapidly changing trend. This was happening already before the pandemic, but this has been triggered to a next level by the pandemic. So the current trend in the market is there is a strong preference for on-prem, on-site erasure. And I would even add at-home erasure. Because when we have servers in the data center, if we have desktops sitting in home offices or in normal physical offices, the handling of the equipment, if we know that there's no data left on it, is a lot easier to manage. It saves costs. You don't have to have armored transports, etc., to remove storage devices and have them resold in a second-hand market if you know that they have been sanitized before they leave your data center or your on-prem on-site definition. So this is very much a key message from today. And the absolute key component to achieve this is to understand the best practices that we want to share. And remote erasure options is the absolute norm how to achieve those best practices. So it doesn't matter if we're in the data center and we're talking storage systems or servers, or if we're looking at normal desktop laptop infrastructure. The key thing here is to be able to look at existing processes, being able to integrate into those processes and run data sanitization at a very efficient and automated manner. And just to, I think we skipped, I want to go straight into this in the essence of time. If we just look at the right side here and focus on the data center and servers, most of you are more than familiar with different management platforms to take care of HP servers, Dell EMC servers, Cisco servers, storage devices like NetApp, Nutanix. There's a great efficiency that can be had by integrating the Blancco erasure software onto those platforms and processes. So if you're using, for example, ILO or iDRAC to manage hundreds or thousands of servers, it's very easy to just include network-based distribution of the software image to target one server or 1,000 servers for an efficient erasure process. And if we look at our, let's say, personal record within Blancco globally, we worked with Microsoft for one of their data centers in North America. And what one administrator did when they were looking at traditional decommissioning processes, they would have gone to every individual server, they would have taken out drives, they would have processed those drives individually. So that was a huge undertaking. What they were able to do now was that they could, over the network, using the normal tools, distribute the software image to target erasure of all of these 4,000 servers that were planned for decommissioning. The erasure runs in parallel for all of those machines. You're harvesting the erasure report back at the end. And of course, you can choose which erasure standard, what kind of compliance that you want to meet. There's security functions inbuilt to the process where you are targeting the correct 4,000 servers, not the wrong ones, because that would be a disaster. And one person were able to run this 4,000 server decommissioning process in less than 10 hours with full audit trail for all of those drives in all of those servers. And comparing that to the traditional process that they used to have, it's a huge cost benefit. It increases security and it reduces the cost of managing that decommissioning. What can happen next is that anyone can step in and just take the full servers with drives and cradles and everything and redeploy them or resell them in a second-hand market. And if we go back to trying to understand where do we have the sweet spots in the data center. So server decommissioning in big volumes is of course extremely important. And when you run a gap analysis with most customers, you are replacing a one-by-one or a drive-by-drive process to a more efficient remote deployment process. Also, when it comes to handling loose drives, there's a big return on investment that can be made looking at, all right, here are drives that are coming from an array. These drives have signaled that they are about to fail. The diagnosis software inside them have turned on a yellow light. They have been replaced. And then if you have a keep my drive program in place, you will actually keep those drives in the data center and then maybe once a year physically destroy them or run a similar process. But 70 to 80% of those drives, looking at big numbers from multiple use cases around the world, that's the average, 70 to 80%, still respond well to read and write commands, which means you can run a secure purge level erasure, getting an audit trail, sending the drive back to manufacturer. Manufacturers are usually happy because they can put drives back in after some maintenance. They can go back into the ecosystem, and then the end customer are saving on penalties that are usually around $800 to $1,000 per drive compared to keeping it on site and destroying it. So great return on investment for that use case. And then if we take a step up and look at entire storage arrays, there are a number of ways that we can also erase those. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. I also wanted to remind you of the last section here that says data migration. That can be whenever we are migrating in between systems, in between data centers. We talked about from on-prem to cloud, in between cloud providers. That data migration, you should always keep an eye open for, because that is a trigger for the need to sanitize data after a successful migration. So let's go back to storage systems. There's, of course, an option if you have a storage system that's end of life, or it goes back at end of lease, or it needs to be redeployed but sanitized before it can be redeployed. You always have the option to call in the OEM. Dell EMC can come and they can run an erasure service, usually quite costly, and they are running that by issuing commands to the system that are overwriting all data on a logical level. You can do the same thing by deploying your own software process. And this is where we have the LUN erasure product that we talked about in the beginning, looking at the entire portfolio. So whatever operating system you might have on a server connected to an array, could be AIX, HPX, Solaris, Mac, Linux, Windows, even ESXi hosts, you can install this software client called Blancco LUN eraser. And then from that host server, if you have access to the underlying storage on LUN level in the storage system, you can target one individual LUN if that's the only need you have, or you can target all of them and erase the entire storage area available in the system. And this can be done after migration or at decommissioning or tech refresh, for example. So this is a solution that we see in high demand in data centers today as an alternative to OEM services, for example. Another thing that I wanted to include before we finalize is also sharing some insight. If you are managing individual virtual machines, how can you, for example, create an audit trail that this selected virtual machine has had a secure end of life or a secure decommissioning process? And the most common platform amongst our global customer base is VMware and the ESXi hypervisor. And what has been developed over the years is actually a tailored client that can be uploaded directly on the ESXi host. And it gives the administrator the opportunity to target from that host with some simple commands selected virtual machines for secure decommissioning. And that means that the virtual drive image is being overwritten and verified, but also all the configuration files and everything related to that specific virtual machine. And we often see that it is a request for audit trail that is the trigger to deploy and use this technology. So what I want you to remember is that you can erase anything from individual virtual machines to LUNs, to all the LUNs in a storage array, that entire array. Sometimes you can even use hardware appliances. So if you don't want to just deploy the software, you can also combine the software process with ready and tailored appliances that can be placed in a data center for easy processing of loose drives, for example. If you don't want to use your own hardware, you can plug and play into a Blancco appliance and erase loose drives, or you can connect a server appliance to an entire array, for example, and then break that array and target each individual drive, where you get drive serial numbers and an erasure on NIST purge level for each individual drive. So using the combination of some clever appliances with software, best practice processes, we can conclude together that remote erasure can be achieved on many different levels for most of the different use cases that you can see in the data center. And when we look at underlying hardware, we don't care if it's a Cisco server, a NetApp, or Nutanix, Dell, HP, all of them will have compatibility with the software approach of data sanitization. So with that, I am planning on stopping. There's a lot of different product certifications and different compliance, etc., behind these solutions that I have been talking about. So should you ever have a need to document why you have chosen this and why it is secure, that is never an issue to achieve together. Back to the host, and if there's any questions based on this introduction to opportunities in the data center and where we can see data erasure being deployed remotely or locally.
Okay, thank you, Fredrik. At the moment, I'm not seeing any questions.
Do we have any bold attendees that want to be unmuted and ask something, or do we have anyone that want to take the opportunity to put something in the chat? So I think we have everything very crisp and clear, hopefully. So what I'm hoping that you'll take away from this session is the insight that on-site erasure has become very important, and it's something to review, either if you are the end customer or if you're working with end customers. And then that there are a number of different best practice processes to achieve that with remote deployment, and that we can target all different assets, both in the data center as well as in the normal desktop infrastructure or the mobile teams, for example. Any final conclusions that you would like to add?
No, not from my side. Everybody, thank you for attending this webinar, and of course, you can be in touch with me if you have any questions. And thank you for your time. And let's go out to enjoy the beautiful weather. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Kiitos.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.